Hello Pathway Explorers, my name is Cathy, and today we're going to be looking at landmark 19, which is to explore biodiversity. Today we're going to be looking at a forest. Forests are one of my favorite places in the world. I always feel very safe and surrounded by friends when I visit a forest. But that feeling comes from having spent a lot of time exploring, and that's what we'd like to do today, looking at all the many kinds of living things that inhabit this forest. Now, a forest is a family of living things that all depend on each other. Sometimes when we look at things individually, we forget how they all fit together and how important it is that each living thing plays its own role in the forest. So biodiversity really starts with the variety of plants that are growing in an area. And this time of year in a forest, this is a mostly deciduous forest, so these trees have had no leaves during the winter, and this is a lovely time when the leaves are just starting to unfold on the trees. But the things that live under the trees, we call them the forest understory, they've been racing against time for the last month to try to bloom and produce seeds before the leaves unfold on the trees and they don't have enough sunlight. And it takes a lot of these plants many years of storing up energy before they can bloom. So especially in the forest, it's really important not to pick any of the flowers because that plant has worked for years to store enough energy to bloom and make seeds. And if you pick the flower, that's all that time and effort wasted for that plant. So it's good to just look at them and appreciate them where they are. You probably recognize this little plant. This is the plant of Ontario. This is a trillium. The tri, first three letters of trillium, mean three. So we have 3 petals, 3 sepals, those are the little leaves behind the petals, and 3 leaves. These flowers usually face up towards the sunlight so that they can attract bees to pollinate them. This is a different kind of trillium. This is a red trillium. These are often kind of facing towards the ground. They're trying to attract flies and beetles to pollinate them. So both the red trillium and the white trillium are totally dependent on insects for their survival. So that's a really good example of some of these interactions in the forest, how all the living things lean on each other, depend on each other. So many kinds of living things depend on the trees in the forest, and one of those are birds. And while we have some birds that stay here all winter long, we have in the spring lots of birds arriving here from way down south, Central America, South America, that come up here to breed. And the trees provide lots of protection. And there's a nest from last year. You can see it's probably a little bird called a vireo that has built its nest using the V fork in the branches as a place to wrap its nest around so that it's held very securely. So trees can provide homes for birds even when the trees are dead. And you can see this tree died a long time ago, and after the tree dies, it attracts all sorts of insects that are breaking down the wood. And that attracts woodpeckers, especially pileated woodpeckers. They've got a big red crest, and they peck holes to get the bugs out of the trees. And then those holes become homes for other kinds of birds. Sometimes it's other woodpeckers, sometimes it's chickadees or nuthatches. And all of those birds love to feed insects to their young. So if we leave some dead trees standing, where they're in safe places, then that provides homes for many kinds of birds, and those birds help to keep the forest healthy. So even a dead tree can do good things for the health of the forest. So a healthy forest is a messy forest. When there are fallen branches, a lot of people think that that should all be cleaned up so the forest looks tidy, but many of those fallen branches provide protection for little birds that will make nests on the ground. Sometimes there'll be places for little salamanders to hide out, lots of different kinds of insects. So having lots of fallen dead wood in the forest is actually a very healthy, a very good thing. And sometimes if you try rolling over a fallen log, you can have a look and you might be lucky to see some really interesting critters hiding underneath. There's so much to explore in a forest. So many different kinds of trees, and they not only have different shaped leaves, but they have different kinds of bark. You probably recognize this one as a white birch or paper birch with the peeling white bark, and this is a tree that's been very important for thousands of years to indigenous peoples. We also have other trees with smooth bark, trees with very scaly bark. This one it's called an ironwood. It's a very slow growing tree and the wood is very dense, almost like iron. It's great for firewood, and you see it's got very shaggy peeling bark. That's a good way to tell an ironwood tree even when it's young. We have lots of sugar maples here as well. We'll have a look at sugar maple bark. So sugar maples have kind of gray bark that kind of hangs in sheets once they get to be this big. And as you probably know, sugar maple is the tree that we make maple syrup from. And if you look closely here, you can see the remnants of a drill hole where I tapped this tree a few years ago to make maple syrup. I try not to tap the same tree every year, just to give them a chance to recover. This is another very characteristic kind of bark. This is eastern white cedar, very common tree around the Peterborough area. And you can see the bark has kind of a reddish tinge to it and very flaky bark. And many small animals like squirrels will take this bark and shred it all up and use that to make a lovely warm place to spend the winter. So you can find lots of little squirrels' nests in the winter made out of this shredded cedar bark. Really good insulation. There's so much to explore and discover in a forest. I've lived here for many years, and every time I go out I see something I never noticed before. But it's really important that everyone play their part in taking care of our local forests. And as we mentioned, please don't pick the forest wildflowers. It takes the plants so long to create them. Wherever there are walking trails, try and make sure that you stay on the trail as much as you can so you don't disturb all the living things on the forest floor. If you do turn over a log or a rock to see what critters you can find underneath, make sure that you put them back in place when you're done. So it's very important to leave the forest the same way that you found it. And then we'll have these beautiful forests for centuries. And here's a challenge for you. Can you find 4 different kinds of trees, 4 different kinds of wildflowers, and 4 different kinds of birds that live in the forest? See you next time.